Zoom platform में होते हैं what होते हैं.
Good morning to all of you. My students, I think I'm going to take today preoperative evaluation and preparation. So that means as an anesthetist, we have certain role to evaluate the patient before the surgery is being taken. So that is main criteria. What we want to do is you want to go in for an evaluation. Preoperatively, I'm going to assess the patient. What are all the things I want from the patient? So everything from head to foot, I have to assess the patient and find out whether the patient is fit for surgery. Is it fine? Okay. So this, as I was telling, you want to reduce the anxiety and you have to ask about the medical history, then the physical status, what are all the investigations done so far, and what about the anesthetic technique, whether I'm going to give a spinal anesthesia or a general anesthesia or just a block. Then I have to get a consent from the patient. That will be an informed consent. So this consent part is very, very important. And what are the orders we are going to give? Pre-op orders. Suppose the patient is a diabetic. I will give an order like, please take fasting blood sugar on the day of surgery. So I just want to know the patient's glycemic level. So the pre-op instructions will stand hold there. And finally, one, you have a doctor-patient relationship. So when I am talking to the patient or when I am seeing the patient pre-operatively, I am more close to the patient and the patient is also having a good relationship with the anesthetist. Thereby, whenever the patient enters the theater, he feels comfortable. Okay, this doctor, I know, I have seen them before. So I am going to be comfortable. So it's very, very important. The doctor-patient relationship is important. Okay, briefly, as you know, no, we are going to ask about the history. The patient had hypertension, diabetes, IHT, epilepsy, asthma, and what are all the other common medical problems the patient is having. Any history of allergy is there, all these things to be asked. So then the medications, history of medications. What are all the medications the patient is taking? The patient can be a diabetic, patient can be taking some drugs, oral hypoglycemic drugs the patient might be taking. The patient might be hypertensive. So patient will be taking antihypertensive drugs. So for that reason, we should know. So why should we anesthetists know why we should know about the medications? Then only we can plan anesthesia. Suppose the patient is a hypertensive patient, I need to control his BP before he is posted for surgery. So for that planning only, I am asking the medications. Then another thing is previous anesthesia. Yes, what type of anesthesia the patient is undergone, whether GA or spinal, whether there was any problem intraoperatively or the patient had recovered or not. So sometimes what happens, when we are giving anesthesia, the patient will not recover. That is, recover means you are not able to extubate the patient. So it will be very difficult in that situation. So we have to find out the cause. So always previous anesthetic records, if available, will be very good. Next come your personal habits, smoking, alcoholism. All this is going to induce it, that is going to interrupt the anesthetic part. So once smoking means the lungs. What about the lungs? What about the carbon monoxide intoxication in that patient? So for these purposes, we are going to ask the history of smoking. Similarly, alcoholism. Because again, once the alcohol is in the blood level, your drugs, anesthetic drugs is going to have some drug interactions. So for that purpose, we have to ask these history. Then your blood transfusion history. Snoring. Why snoring? Because anesthetists are more concerned with the airway. So whenever there is snoring, you are alerted. Okay, some problem in the airway. So I have to be careful with this patient. So I am asking history of snoring. So you have patient-related risk factors, like what are the risk factors are for the pulmonary. So according to the respiratory system, what are all the things you are going to say? Probably the age, obesity, smoking, general health status, COPD. If the patient has got asthma or COPD, then their criteria will be different and the anesthetic management will also be different. And again, here comes the cardiovascular system risk stratification. So here again, we will just classify them into high risk, intermediate risk, low risk. So here this cardiac index status, all these are under high risk, like ischemic heart disease, congestive heart failure, cerebrovascular disease, insulin therapy for diabetes, and if the creatinine value is more than 2, all these category you have to monitor them properly, pre-op, intra-op, as well as post-operatively. So this is your revised cardiac index. And again, what is this METs? That is metabolic equivalence. So it is nothing. You're going to see the metabolic capacity of that patient. What is the activity of the patient? So normally we say if the metabolic equivalence is more than 4, the patient is fine. The patient is very fine. If less than 4, then we have to go through what is the wrong with the patient. So here we have segregated into 1.5, 1.6 to 2.9, 3 to 5.9, more than 6. It's nothing like you find out the activity of the patient, whether the patient is able to walk for a long, a patient is able to climb the steps, or jogging, cycling. So if it is more than 6, the patient can jog, patient can cycle, patient can climb uphill. So this is all comes under metabolic equivalence of task. Next, coming to your physical examination. So I have finished the history. So history part I have done. I'm going to go for the physical examination. The physical examination will be your general examination. General examination, think of your weight, height, pulse rate, BP, pallor, icterus, edema, everything you have to see. Then your pulse rate, whether the patient is having bradycardia or tachycardia. So bradycardia will be your sinus bradycardia, sick sinus syndrome, hypothyroidism. Tachycardia, if the patient is anemic, hypothyroid, smoker, then that patient will have tachycardia. Again, you have to know whether the patient is having a low BP or a high BP. So all these will be done under physical examination. So pallor means will be anemic. Now, patient has got edema means you are think of your renal failure or congestive cardiac failure. So suppose edema means if it is a periorbital edema, you go more in the favor of renal. If it is a periorbital edema, then liver failure, malnutrition. See, malnutrition, anasarca, hypoproteinemia, generalized edema of the body. Again, icterus means some pathology in the liver and gallbladder. Why we are bothered about this icterus? Because the drugs which you are giving, anesthetic drugs, is going to be metabolized in the liver. So we have to know whether the liver is functioning properly. That is why we have to see whether icterus is there. And finally, we come to the systemic examination, where you have your cardiovascular system, respiratory system, central nervous system, abdomen, and spine. So every system you have to examine in detail. Suppose you're going to go in for a respiratory system, see whether the airway is clear, lungs are clear, there is no rolls or rhonchi. Cardiovascular system, see whether there's any murmur is there, you're able to hear only the normal sounds. And CNS, check whether the patient is oriented, conscious, whether all the systems are proper. Abdomen, just check whether he's got any organomegaly or something. And then spine is very, very important for the anesthetist, because whenever we are giving a spinal anesthesia, if the spine is normal only, the anesthetist will be comfortable. Suppose there is kyphosis or scoliosis. You know what is kyphosis and scoliosis? Kyphosis is the forward bending of the spine, and scoliosis will be the lateral displacement, lateral curvature of the spine. So when these two conditions are ruled out, the anesthetist is comfortable. Another important test we want to do, test for the cardiopulmonary reserve, is the breath holding. What is this breath holding? You ask the patient to breath hold. So ask him to hold his breath and wait, check. Now, if it is really more than 25 seconds, yes, the patient is normal. He does not have any respiratory or cardiovascular untoward events. It is normal. But if it is less than 50 seconds, it is severely decreased. The cardiopulmonary reserve is severely decreased, and we have to go in for a workup like pulmonary function test to be done for these patients. So as I said, cardiovascular system, you have to check for the murmur, respiratory system, bronchiectasis, abdomen organomegaly, CNS, and genitourinary system examination to be done. And the most important thing for the anesthetist is the airway assessment. Why airway assessment? Because the anesthetist is going to put an endotracheal tube inside the trachea. So it is going to go into the trachea. So for that, how are you going to pass that endotracheal tube? It is only going through the mouth. So the mouth opening should be adequate. Then the neck movement should also be adequate. Unless your mouth opening is adequate, you will be able to intubate. Intubation is putting introduction of the endotracheal tube into the trachea. Neck movements, unless it is adequate, I can able to extend or flex the neck. What about the denture status? If the patient is having denture, when I'm doing an intubation, it can accidentally get lodged and it can get into the lungs. Another important thing is the Mallampati grading, and another one is thyrometal distance. So these will help. See, this is the full picture view of your mouth. You can see the uvula in the center and both sides tonsil, the arch. The tonsils will be seated in the tonsillar arch, and you have the soft palate visible. So this is the full view of the mouth, and with this, we will go on with the Mallampati classification. So here, with this pictorial representation, this classification comes under class 1, Mallampati class 1. So if it is class 1 Mallampati means it shows that the intubation will be very easy. Again, class 2, then class 3, class 4. Can you see in class 4 that mouth opening, the uvula, tonsillar arch, nothing is seen. So here in class 3 and class 4, intubation will be very difficult. Whereas in class 1 and class 2, intubation will be very easy. So this is an important test done by the anesthetist for the airway assessment. So another important thing we want to do is the jaw movement, whether the patient is able to recede the mandible, protrude everything. So jaw movement, again, how are you going to find out? The interincisor gap and anterior subluxation. So what is the interincisor gap? The distance between the upper incisor and the lower incisor. So normally what we do, no, we put 3 fingers in between the gap of the patient, the teeth, upper teeth and the lower teeth of the patient. And if all the 3 fingers are getting inserted, yes, it is fine. There is no difficult airway. You can easily intubate the patient. But if it is less means, then you have to think twice. Okay, there is some problem. Maybe there can be some sclerosis of the joint, temporomandibular joint can get sclerosed. So something can occur. Then you have a receding mandible. You can see in the picture, see the mandible is receded. Again, here you're going to have a difficult intubation. And sometimes the maxillary portion, the incisors will be protruding. So that is called as buck teeth. So the upper teeth will be protruding out. And again, this patient, no, when you're going to intubate, we will have some difficulty. Probably we can knock off the teeth. So all these problems can occur with these patients. So after the initial airway assessment, spine assessment and airway assessment, the anesthetist has come to a conclusion. Okay, this is the scenario and this is the type of anesthesia I am planning to give. The next important role we go into is the investigations. Why hemoglobin you want to do? Yes, you want to find out whether the patient is anemic or not. What if patient is anemic? The oxygen carrying capacity of the blood will be reduced. So why? Because the hemoglobin is reduced. Hemoglobin is important to carry out the oxygen, isn't it? So the oxygen carrying capacity, once it is reduced, the anesthetist will find difficulty. So you need to know the hemoglobin status of the patient. Next, you have to find out the sugar levels, your random blood sugar level. Why random blood sugar level? So you want to know whether the patient is diabetic or not. So first, initially you take RBS. Suppose there are altered values, then you can go for your fasting and postprandial level. But suppose you know this patient is a diabetic, then you have to take immediately fasting and postprandial levels. So this is for your diabetic patients. And next, why you want to take blood urea, serum creatinine, serum electrolytes, all this you want to know. What about the renal parameters? Because the drugs that is given during anesthesia is metabolized in the liver and excreted in the kidney. So for that reason, we have to know the value of the kidney parameters, renal parameters. So urea, creatinine, electrolytes, everything should be done. Another important thing is the coagulation profile, like your bleeding time, clotting time, prothrombin time, all these things, platelet count, everything should be done. Because in pediatric cases, coming with some disorder, no, you should not, they might have some bleeding disorders. So without knowing that complete coagulation profile as an anesthetist, we are not in a complete form. And finally, you must know about the blood grouping, typing, everything. Unless you know that, you'll be confident, because on the day of surgery, you need sometimes major surgeries, you need some reservation of blood. So unless you know the grouping beforehand, you can reserve blood. And after these routine blood investigations, you have another important component is the ECG. Why ECG? Yes, because I want to know about the activity, the electrical activity of the heart should be known, whether it is a normal ECG or an abnormal ECG. Yes, normal ECG, I can go ahead. If it is an abnormal ECG, what is the finding? Whether the patient is having ischemic changes, whether it's a new MI or old MI. So unless I know a complete picture of the electrical activity of the heart, the anesthetist should be confident enough to give anesthesia. And next is X-ray chest. What is the role of X-ray chest? Yes, you want to know whether the patient lungs are clear, whether it got pulmonary tuberculosis or there is fibrosis, a consolidation. Fibrosis is the trachea might be pulled towards the side, and that time again your intubation will be difficult. So consolidation. So all these things to be ruled out before you take up the case. So as I said, renal function test, then the liver function test. Again, why liver function test? We want to know because the drugs are metabolized in the liver. So you know to have a view of the liver function test. So protein level, albumin, globulin, all this should be known. And finally, you have some special investigations. Yeah, what are those special investigations? You need an echo. Not for all patients we do echo. If the patient is having some comorbid illness, or if the patient is around more than 40 years, then you need to take an echo. You want to know the activity of the heart. The ECG is only going to find out the electrical activity, whereas an echo, it is going to show how the heart is functioning, how the heart is pumping, whether there is ventricular hypertrophy, concentric hypertrophy, or what about the ejection fraction, whether the ventricles are functioning normal. So for all these things, you need an echo. And next is your CT. So CT of lungs. So if you're having any doubt, you do a CT. Then this D-dimer, everything can be done as an additional method wherever it is needed. And finally, angio. If it is a coronary artery disease, you can go on doing an angio. Okay, now I have seen the patient. I have done all the investigations. I have checked the airway. I have checked the spinal column. Everything I have done. Now what I am going to do? I have to put a fitness for the patient. So under what category I have to give fitness? So we have a group called as American Society of Anesthesiologists. What does it stand for? ASA1. It means if I am fitting the patient, that is I am giving fitness under ASA1, it means the patient is normally fit, normal healthy patient, except for that pathology he has. So there is no risk to the anesthetist. So this is a normal healthy patient. Suppose if it is ASA2, no, the patient will have some mild functional limit, some systemic disorder, patient have hypertension or mild diabetes, or patient can be obese. So here, what is my inferences in ASA2? Okay, so some problem can arise with this patient. I will inform the patient's attendant. I will inform the patient that some problem can arise. So my mind will have a clear-cut idea. The next one you have is ASA3, where you have severe systemic disorders. So you have an implanted pacemaker, or patient can have an angina, or severe hypertension, severe diabetes, severe morbid obesity. In these cases, I will get high risk informed consent, telling the patient and the patient attender, we will give anesthesia, but the patient can go in for a ventilator setup. Recovery might be delayed, so I might put the patient into the ventilator. Suppose I'm taking it under spinal, okay, I might get converted into general anesthesia. So some problem will be there, which is going to be viewed in a strict way. So this is ASA3. Next comes the ASA4. Here, of course, it's a very severe systemic illness where there is a constant threat to life. So there can be severe stroke, myocardial infarction, everything can be in the extreme limit. So what I'm going to do? Yeah, I might be compelled to take because it might be an emergency case. Like can be a road traffic accident. So there is no time for me to stabilize this patient. So I am forced to take this case. So at that time, I always write high informed risk consent and inform the patient that nothing, there is a constant threat to the life, and we might or may not. So that word should be put into the informed consent. And ASA 5 is morbid. Yes, the survival is very, very rare. I'm expecting death on table. Yes, I'm posting the patient. I have to post. There is no other go, but the survival may not be there. So patient is not expected to survive without the operation. So here you have to think whether you have to, this is like a cat on the wall phenomena, whether we are going to do the surgery or we are not going to do. So this cat on the wall phenomena. So these patients will be coming under ASA 5. And finally, the ASA 6 is your brain dead donor patients. No? There we will classify them as ASA 6. So with all this ASA 1, 2, 3, 4, in emergency procedure, we add a word E. E means emergency. So to that ASAPS, ASAPS is PS is physical status. So American Society of Anesthesiologists, physical status, E means emergency. So if we are going to take it as an emergency surgical procedure, we add on E. So now we have assessed the patient and we have managed to put that patient into one of the categories of ASA, either ASA 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So with this category, we will next proceed with the surgery. So once we have given fitness, we should know we have to give some orders. That is free of orders. We have given fitness. Now I am going to give order to my surgeon that these things to be done, these things not to be done. So what are the things I will give orders? Okay, suppose a patient is on oral hypoglycemic agents, minor surgery. Okay, just stop. On the day of procedure, stop. Suppose if it is a major surgery, please switch on to insulin. Don't give oral hypoglycemic drugs. Switch on to insulin. And insulin to be stopped on the day of procedure. So all this is done in order to prevent severe hypoglycemia intraoperatively, because the patient already will be on insulin. Patient will also be on the NPO status. And if you give more insulin on the day of surgery, patient can go in for severe hypoglycemia. So in order to avoid this factor, we stop insulin on the day of procedure. The next point is, what about your oral anticoagulants? Usually the cardiac patients, they will be taking oral anticoagulants, like it could be an aspirin or a clopidogrel. So all these to be stopped 4 to 5 days before the procedure. Why? Because if you're going to use this, there'll be bleeding. So you want to stop all that. And also this low molecular weight heparin, that is also stopped 12 to 24 hours before the procedure. If it is your normal heparin, no, those days we use stunt fraction heparin, that should be stopped 6 hours. Low molecular weight heparin, enoxaparin, on that is the example. That should be stopped 12 to 24 hours before the procedure. Okay, now this orders I have given. Now another thing, important thing is, suppose the patient is anemia, I will ask them, okay, transfuse some blood. And for major surgery, I will again ask them to reserve blood. And what about my pre-medications I have to give? Next, as I was telling earlier, one of the important role is the informed consent. So always try to inform the patient about the patient's health, to the attendant, to the patient. Everything should be informed in well hand before, and always try to put it in the patient's own language. The consent should be in the patient's own regional language. This is very, very important in now next coming to the NPO guidelines, that is nil per oral guidelines. So For any case, posted for surgery, you need some amount of starvation, isn't it? So what is the norms we have? So this is 246. 2 means clear fluid. So the patient can take clear fluids up. That is 2 hours. He should be fasted. Next year, 4 hours. Your breast milk, it is for 4 hours. It is not clear fluid. It is for 4 hours. Any juice, pulpy juice, that can be also for 4 hours. And finally, the solids, that will be up to 6 hours. So fasting guidance is very, very important. 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours. This part you should keep in mind. So with this NPO guidelines, you have to follow very carefully. This is very, very important for the anesthetist because of the risk of aspiration. So finally, what I'm going to try is always before taking the patient for any procedure, the anesthetist will finally evaluate, try to optimize the patient, and then only will be posted for the surgery. And plus, I already was speaking to you, the patient and the doctor relationship will also be maintained. So I hope this session was very useful to you. Thank you.